Sometimes SHTF happens while you're not even looking for it. And while we're being distracted, our attention is diverted to things like the pandemic and to the current unrest we're experiencing. Things that are worse than what we're actually experiencing right now could be happening in the background. And if you stick around for the rest of the video, we're going to talk about what we can expect to come in the future and what's been boiling up underneath the surface while our attention has been diverted to the other things we're experiencing right now. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and today we're going to talk about how SHTF can happen while you're not looking. And sometimes what you're looking at and what your attention is focused on isn't actually what's going to cause SHTF in the long run, okay? So recently our attention's been diverted in many ways. We've been looking at the pandemic, we've been experiencing the unrest in the country right now, and we're looking at those events and saying, this is important, this is priority, this is SHTF. And to think that way wouldn't make you wrong necessarily. It's definitely something we're experiencing, and while it's occurring, we should be preparing in a way that emulates what those events could eventually turn into. However, our attention has been distracted for a long time, and because of that, things have been happening in the background that we might not have paid attention to. So I want to make you aware of what those things are and what you can expect moving forward. And I want to make you aware of a couple other things as well that I've noticed throughout this whole situation we've gone through. So quickly, if you're going to get prepared for SHTF and you want to make sure you're on top of it, hit the subscribe button below so we can all keep talking about it and make sure we survive and thrive together throughout the rest of 2020. Okay, so a lot of things were adversely attacked during the last situation we've gone through. During the pandemic, places like bars, restaurants, sporting events, everything else related to public gatherings were shut down, and people weren't able to congregate and come together and talk about how they felt about the things that were happening to them, okay? Well, we removed the ability for people to entertain themselves, and we removed the ability for people to let off that steam that they build up throughout the week while they're at work or while they're dealing with the stresses of trying to survive in our current system, okay? Well, there's a thing called bread in circuses, and when you take away the circus, you're only left with the bread. Okay, well, we've talked about food shortages on this channel a lot, and the bread is going to be very important here soon. But the food shortage is just the start of it. The big underlying SHTF monster that's hiding under the bed that none of us are necessarily looking at right now, but should be, is the economy. The economy is in the state of collapse right now. It is falling apart. It's in shambles. And the economy can only last so long off the boosts that it's getting from the government and off the false promises that aren't going to be able to be kept in order to keep it alive and going. And while we're focused on the pandemic and while we're focused on the unrest, the economy has been crippled and the economy has been on life support ever since any of this started. And because of that, a lot of us are going to see things get continually worse. And it's not because the unrest is going to grow out of control, and it's not because the food shortages are going to keep spiraling, and it's not because the pandemic is going to have a resurgence. All those things are probably going to happen. But the reason behind all of them, and the reason why our country is going in the direction it is because we are on an economy right now that is collapsing. It's on its last leg. And unfortunately, a lot of people aren't paying attention to it the way that they should be because of everything else going on. Because if the entire populace was to wake up the next day and realize that this economy was basically fake at this point and that nobody really had a leg to stand on when it came to having monetary exchange of goods, then things would get bad really quickly. When people realize what they have is not worth anything, then what is it worth working for? What is it worth saving for? What is it worth owning anything? And when property becomes valueless, people treat it as such. So the unrest will grow because people will realize, I don't have a job, I don't have an income, I don't have a way to support my family. Things will exponentially grow when it comes to unrest. The pandemic will also grow because not only will people be out and about trying to figure out how they're going to survive in this new economy that's no longer able to keep up, those people are going to get sick, and the numbers, whether or not they're inflated, are going to continue to grow because it's a distraction from what's really happening. And when you want to talk about all of the other SHTF scenarios we talk about on a regular basis, those things like the food shortages are going to continue to grow, because at the end of the day, everything is interlinked and interconnected with the economy. So the economy right now is on life support. It is not able to be brought back. It doesn't happen that way. You can't just get a defibrillator and make the economy come back the same way as you would a human being. It is in shambles, and people aren't really raising the alarm on the economy the same way they are on the pandemic, the same way they are on the unrest, the same way they are on the food shortages, because it's not as easy to sell people that idea. When someone collects a paycheck and it goes into their bank account and they're able to go to the store and buy groceries or buy items that they earn that money with, and they want to buy something with it, well, they don't feel like there's some kind of a dire situation at hand. But when there's less food on the table or food's more expensive, they feel the food shortage. When people are getting sick and people are going to the hospital, they feel the pandemic. When there's lockdowns, when you're not able to go out to eat, or when you're not able to go to a football game, people feel that, they feel the pandemic. And when people are in the middle of a city that's having unrest and people are experiencing property damage and people's lives being lost, those people are experiencing the unrest and they see it and they believe it. But the economy is a harder one to sell people on because it's not tangible. It's not something you have in your hands and you can't see it. So the problem is that it might look good on paper. It might look good in the stock market. But in reality, with this joblessness that's going on right now, unemployment's through the roof. Businesses are closing. You will see more and more and more businesses close because this ripple of the pandemic and the lockdowns was unsurvivable by many businesses. A lot of people are going to be out of work. A lot of businesses are going to be out of revenue. And a lot of people are going to start experiencing this economic collapse before maybe you do, or before the next person does, because it's going to come in tiers. It's going to be staggered, and it's going to affect the lower income individuals sooner than people who are in the middle class and the upper class and everywhere else. So this economic collapse is real, and it's happening. And it's going to lead to worse things like unrest. It's going to lead to lockdowns. It's going to lead to a power grab when it comes to the government. And worst of all, it will probably lead into some kind of a conflict, whether or not that's domestic or foreign. Because when money gets tight and when people can't afford to pay their bills, somebody comes knocking and that person wants you to pay up. And if you can't, they're going to make you. So the economy is in shambles. And I can't stress that enough. And if you ask me, this economy is the #1 SHTF scenario anyone should be worried about. Because the likelihood that an event could send us back to the Stone Age or back to the Middle Ages or back to a time before technology is rare. The likelihood of that is in the probably 1 to 3 percentile at the most, okay? But the likelihood of going into a version of a third world country because of the economy collapsing and people reacting to it negatively in a violent manner even, is definitely high. That's a big possibility. And the solutions to an economic collapse are even worse. War, AI, and everything else related to trying to stimulate an economy that might not have an off switch. So I wanted to make sure to address that. I wanted to talk to you all about it because it's becoming more and more obvious. And if you don't see it, go ahead and start looking into it, because I guarantee you, once you start researching the idea of the economy collapsing or the fact that it's built on false promises that can't be kept at this point, you'll see that we're actually in dire straits and that we need to do our best as people of a prepared mindset who are worried about SHTF scenarios to become economically independent and to find ways to continue to generate revenue and generate ways to maintain property and maintain assets while you might be out of a job, or you might not be able to afford your mortgage, or you might not be able to pay your phone bill. Who knows what might happen? But you have to start setting aside those assets now, and you have to be responsible to make sure you have the ability to take care of yourself for a certain period of time if things were to go bad, okay? So use your prepared mindset. Yes, survival is important. Yes, security is important. Food is very important. make sure you're also being financially responsible, because right now things are looking really bad. The economy is not recovering the way everyone wants to say it is. Just because the stock market went up, just because oil went up, just because any of the asset classes went back up, doesn't mean this whole economy is just suddenly rebounding. It means that we're in a false bubble of safety, which is being propped up by things that we don't even have control over, okay? But when you see the businesses closing, when you see the joblessness where it's at, and when you see unemployment where it's at, you can't look at those things and assume the economy is going to be doing okay. So do what you can, and keep in mind that anytime there's an economic collapse, the likelihood of conflict and the likelihood of unrest and the likelihood of some type of violence is very high. Because once people get that desperate and once people need what you have to be prepared to defend yourself and defend your family from those people who decide that you don't need that anymore, okay? So I wanted to make sure to address this. Things are looking the way they are. And remember, we're not only coming up on November, which is going to be very contentious, but there's always an October surprise. And don't be surprised if in October things tank, because that is the perfect time for the powers that be to pull the plug, let's just say, and have a restart while trying to change things for whatever intention they have. So keep that in mind. We're on our way. We don't have a lot of time left in the sense of making sure that we're ready to go for when that time shows up, because it's coming soon. And we can see that things aren't really getting better. They're just escalating. And if we keep escalating, we're going to find ourselves in a WROL type situation, or we're going to find ourselves in a big time SHTF scenario. So I wanted to make sure you're aware. Leave comments below, let me know your thoughts, but it is something I'm concerned about, and I want to keep warning you all and make sure that we're all on the same page with what it comes to what we're preparing for. So if you have any other questions, let me know, and that's going to be it for Magic Prep.